Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is part one of a special two-part series addressing issues related to wildfires. And joining me are five experts on the subject, each with diverse backgrounds. My first guest is Rick Goddard, the president of Calum Systems, who came a long way to join us. Rick, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
My next guest is the executive director of the Colorado Department of Public Safety, which includes the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. It's Jim Davis, my favorite former FBI agent.
Thank you, Aaron. My pleasure.
Thanks for being here, Jim. Really appreciate it. And a gentleman who I've known for far too long, the former Undersecretary for the United States Department of Agriculture, and the gentleman who has been twice the Executive Director of the Department of Natural Resources for the state of Colorado, among many other positions, Harris Sherman.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Aaron.
Delighted to have you, Harris. And also joining me, Rick Hatton, the president and CEO of 10 Tanker Air Carrier, another long-distance traveler. Rick, really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you, sir.
And can't wait to hear your efforts in the ground and on the air, fighting fires on behalf of citizens here in Colorado. And the former head of aviation for the United States Forest Service in California,
Yes, sir.
Dennis Holbert. Dennis, thank you also for joining me. In fact, we have three of you gentlemen came a long way to join us. I very much appreciate that. You just saw some footage of wildfires. One of the first issues I want to talk about in terms of in the public's mind is the cost of wildfires. I also want to talk about, when there is a wildfire, public officials, and this isn't meant to give you, Harris, or Jim a hard time. Well, maybe it is. You hear public officials say, we're doing everything we can. And my sense as I've studied the issue is there are a lot of other things we can do, but resources are limited. So I want to talk also about what else we can do. I want to talk about what each of you has done and what you're doing in the industry and what you think we could do better, as well as how do we get the resources to the right people in government and in the private sector so we can be more effective. Because one of the things we've seen is this extraordinary amount of destruction, especially in the last 2 years from wildfires. And one of the facts that our research uncovered was that when you look at roughly an average of $2 billion being spent to fight or suppress wildfires in the United States, with that number going up every year and headed towards $4 billion a year, some estimates are that the total amount of damage actually that's occurring can be 20 or 30 times that number. That people's health is affected long term, that businesses are lost, you have infrastructure destroyed, people's homes, of course, are one of the most obvious signs, destroyed. No value necessarily even put on people losing family items and historical things of historical value. The long-term health implications can stretch for hundreds and even thousands of miles in terms of how wildfires impact people. You don't really hear that in the public discussion. So I guess I'd like to start off with your sense of what these impacts are and what you've seen, some of what you've seen on the ground in terms of these natural disasters. Rick, I'm going to start off with you.
Well, one of the reasons that we got involved and developed the system that we have was to try to take advantage of existing resources. Because the cost is so great, the environmental cost is so great, and the loss to the individual, we believe that using the existing resources smarter could be part of the solution. It's a very complex problem, but it is one that is continuing to grow. The cleanup efforts afterwards and the cost afterwards economically to the areas really are not being calculated into the equation of the cost to fight wildfires.
And tell us a little bit about what your company's been doing and what success you've had and where you've been frustrated a little bit.
Well, our company has developed a container delivery system method, essentially metric ton raindrops that can be loaded in any cargo plane. And the background I have is in marine aviation as a command and control guy for close air support. And it just seemed to us, with all of the other activities that we've been involved with containers, dropping food, medicine, ammunition, those types of things, that there could be a solution here. So we developed a package that's now been or being adopted over in Europe, that any cargo configured aircraft can now deliver material over a fire. We're still in the very early stages of many of this, and we believe that filling in that part of the equation of a rapid response with a sufficient amount of material safely from a safe altitude is key, and possibly getting into the 24-hour delivery method.
So one of the advantages to your solution is that you provide a system that a wide variety of planes can use, it sounds like.
Correct.
Okay, so that makes sense. Jim, when you've seen what's happened, the devastation here in Colorado, and the department, what does the department need to really be more effective? What would you like to see happen from a resource perspective?
Well, I think it's key that we are most successful when we get a good initial attack on a fire. And oftentimes the best way to do that is with some sort of aviation resource. The state of Colorado, we have standing contracts with seats, which are single engine air tankers. They are our assets by contract. We can get those things onto a fire pretty quickly. We have some helicopters on contract that we can use to get to fires, in addition to using National Guard helicopters. But certainly the ability to get either water or retardant on a fire very early in the fire can make all the difference in the world, really, when you're looking at a small fire versus something that gets out of control and causes a lot of damage.
I'm amazed, and I've had some minor personal experience, which I won't relate in detail. I'm amazed at how you think you can have a fire under control, and how just a change in wind direction and wind speed in a matter of minutes can take something that's a few acres and turn it into thousands of acres. I mean, Harris, from a federal perspective, you were in charge of the United States Forest Service, and they have the aviation division. One of the things that has confounded me is that at one point that division had control over 45 planes to fight fires, and I've been told now that's down to 11. Is that number accurate?
Well, I'm not sure 11's the accurate number, but it's true that a lot of the fleet that the Forest Service oversaw, these were older planes. Frequently they were 50 years old. Forest Service has been forced to retire many of these planes because they're not fit for fighting fires. So the Forest Service is using some of these planes now. We have approximately 9 of these planes that we call P2s that are available to fight fires. But the Forest Service is now reaching out to develop a next generation of aircraft. They have contracted for 7 new aircraft for the coming fire season. Hopefully these planes will be ready. And then
should that number be more like 70 though?
Well, the problem is these planes are very expensive. The cost of providing adequate aircraft is enormous, and you have to weigh that against the budgetary realities that the agency faces. The military does provide backup planes, which is helpful. Sometimes states like California have additional planes, Alaska, Canada. But we have to look at the overall picture. And the overall picture is partly having adequate aircraft and equipment to fight fires. But part of it is to get communities ready to fight fires. And importantly, probably the most important part of it is to restore the national forest and private forest so that they're healthy and they can withstand these catastrophic fires that are coming. That is an extremely expensive, difficult problem that the agency has to face in the future.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then I want to come back to Rick and Dennis for your take on this as well. We're talking about wildfires. This is Aaron Harber. We'll see you after this short break.
The advantage of a large air tanker, such as the BE-200, is that the aircraft flies at 400 miles per hour and can scoop and drop water for 2.5 hours on 1 tank of gas. With its 3,000-gallon capacity scooped up in 18 seconds, the BE-200 can scoop from numerous bodies of water and the Pacific Ocean. It delivers up to 50,000 gallons of water an hour on a fire, making it extremely fast and cost-effective.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbortv.com.
Fire ice is the #1 choice for single-engine air tankers. Fire ice gives seats a tremendous advantage in initial attack operations where resources, homes, and communities are directly threatened by fire. Easy to use, mix, and store, Fire ice only requires 62 pounds or 2.5 buckets of dry powder mixed with 800 gallons of water to effectively fill an 802 aircraft. The drop characteristics of fire ice provide for an excellent ground pattern, alleviating mist and drift. Fire ice is dyed for visibility and will not stain aircraft, tarmacs, or any painted surfaces. To learn more about fire ice and aerial firefighting, you can find us on the web at fireice.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbortv.com.
All right, welcome back to part one of our two-part series on wildfires. So, I mean, there are different techniques, and Rick, I'd like you to talk about this too. I mean, Rick Goddard, you talk about the container approach, which seems to give a lot of flexibility, that you can access a lot of aircraft. Here with the footage we saw of kind of the scoop and fill and drop approach, obviously if you can keep a plane in the air of any kind and you're putting water or retardant on a fire and you're not having to land it and refill the containers that way, it strikes me this is another approach that adds a certain element of efficiency. What do you think works? And tell me about what you do as well.
Well, I think it's important in the small segment of firefighting known as aviation to focus on what the firefighter on the ground really wants. And typically that boils down, as we've learned in our 8 fire seasons that we've been operating the DC-10, that's having an adequate amount of retardant in the right spot at the right time. And there's no such thing as a big fire that didn't start as a small fire. Witness the Black Forest or the even more devastating Waldo Canyon a year earlier here in Colorado. Had those fires been detected early and contained early, they never would have made the news and we wouldn't be talking about them today. Unfortunately, that would probably have constrained budgets even further. So what it really boils down to is bringing enough of the right resource at the right time and hopefully with the highest degree of safety and the cheapest unit cost. And I agree with what all of the panelists have said thus far. There's a place for almost every technology available or on the drawing board if it meets those criteria. Does it add to the equation of containing and suppressing fires? Because as you mentioned, Aaron, at the outset, the cost of not suppressing and containing a fire puts another 0 or 2 on the cost of suppressing it adequately.
With the Next Gen program and my sense of the next generation program, I've been in the software industry, when I say next generation, I'm usually thinking fairly advanced. My impression is the Next Gen program includes some planes that are still pretty old. Is that an accurate statement? Or, I mean, you're nodding your head, Harris and Rick.
It is.
I mean, it's not like we're building, getting the newest and best aircraft. We're still going to aircraft that are, some of them 20, 30 years old?
Right, but think of an airplane. Age and the ability of an airplane to perform a given mission are not particularly well correlated. An airplane is thousands of parts flying in formation, each of which has a wear-out rate, and each of which is by law mandated to be inspected at a proper interval. and then is either repaired or replaced. So an aged airplane can be very effective. It can also be very cost effective because the utilization in this business is dreadfully low. We fly less in 1 year than FedEx flies a DC-10 in 1 month. So you don't want, a $100 million airplane sitting there doing nothing.
So in that vein, I mean, Rick, your solution allows almost any plane or a wide variety of planes to be used.
Yeah.
With a plane like a DC-10, I would assume that allows you to put an extraordinary amount of material, water, retardant, gel, or whatever it is, on a fire. And Harris, you talked about the cost. When you look at the total cost, this is a really interesting issue because I think the public would look at a total cost and say, wow, if this is really costing us 50 or 100 billion a year long term in terms of total costs, why aren't we spending more? The people affected aren't necessarily paying that cost. So talk a little about the distribution of costs and what is the budget for aviation in the U.S. Forest Service annually today with that Next Gen program?
Well, I don't know the specific figures on the budget for air tankers, but the Forest Service in 2012 spent in excess of $2.5 billion on the fire suppression, fire preparation side. That contrasts to spending approximately $1 billion on forest restoration. And when you have a catastrophic fire in progress, you have to put whatever resources you have there to extinguish this fire. The problem is that by allocating these funds, these extraordinary amounts of money, to fire suppression, you are borrowing money from all of these other programs that the Forest Service has, including restoration, research, recreation, and so forth. So it's a problem because the Forest Service's budget is really controlled by what happens with these catastrophic fires. You have to fight these fires, and you have to fight them as effectively as possible. So that's a problem, and the question is, who ought to be paying for this? How do we build the resources to truly address the issue? Now, that's a very complicated problem. I think people don't realize that this problem extends well beyond the federal government. The federal government has some resources, but we have to bring other resources to bear. Who are the beneficiaries of extinguishing fires? Well, obviously, it's the homeowners. It's obviously water districts that are protecting watersheds. It's electric utilities that are protecting transmission lines. It's recreation areas, resorts that are protecting the land adjacent to them. I think all of these entities have a responsibility in working with the federal government to figure out how you prepare communities better, how you fight wildfires, and how you restore forest.
Okay, well, when we come back, Dennis, I want you to jump in. You haven't had a chance. I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you're doing, but also your experience, because you've had extensive experience in the aviation arena in California, where some of the nation's most costly fires certainly have occurred. So we're going to take our last break in part one, and we'll be right back with our panel.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. It's tough for me to limit myself to 140 characters, but you can see how well I do by following the show on Twitter. Follow me at @Aaron Harber.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment of part one of the two-part series on wildfires. So, Dennis, talk a little bit about your experience and what you're doing now, especially given the comments that have preceded you.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to back up a little bit, and I think that what was brought up before, the initial attack, is where the focus can be. Because think of a wind-driven event, and if it's jumping eight-lane freeway, how's an air tanker or anything else going to stop it? So, the focus can always be initial attack, get them when they're small. Because once the weather takes over, you kind of have to wait until you have an opportunity to fight it, and that's where the big costs come in. And so our motto was always kind of spend to save, get there quick and get it out.
Do we do a poor job of that in the United States?
No, I think we do. I think the percentage rate is what, 96%, 98% of the fires get caught. It's that small percentage that we struggle with as aviation managers and fire managers to try to get a handle on it. And, there's never going to be enough resources when you have thousands of fires burning in California or the wind event or whatever. And, it was always like, you don't need bad firefighters till you need them really, really bad. So there's kind of a balance there that you have to take. Another point that you asked the question.
But clearly, hold on. But clearly, there are a lot of cases where I know in Colorado there were calls for aviation support, and that support did not come.
I'm sure that's the case, and that there's always, you never have enough
But then you had a small fire or a significant fire that really, became a major fire. I guess my concern is, are we aggressive enough in attacking fires in the United States compared to other countries? Could we do a better job of that? Or is the cost, when you do a cost-benefit analysis, does it make sense to accept the fact that you're just not going to have enough resources? And I guess let me add one other factor. It's one thing if you fill 90% of the requests, and you say, that extra 10% geometrically is very expensive. But if you're only fulfilling half of the requests, that strikes me as a huge gap. Am I wrong about that?
No, that's right. In fact, I just finished a study for the Forest Service where we looked at that and figured out how many unable to fills were there and what would be an appropriate number of aircraft to do that. Another thing you got to remember.
Well, what'd you find?
Well, there was a percentage. You want to get 100% of them down to a 90%, and the agency's going to have to decide what that balance is.
What would that cost?
I don't know what the cost would be. The thing you got to remember too, when he addressed the fact that they were down a whole bunch of air tankers, during that period of time we added 35 more helicopters and the Type 1 helicopters. So there was a balance being struck. In the 80s we didn't have all the resources that we have now in the helicopter world, especially in Type 1s, we had none. And so there was 35 of those added to augment it. So there's a balance and a place for everything. And all these different tools, they all have their place, but you're never going to have enough of them when your house is on fire.
You're absolutely right. From a layperson's perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I may be, but if I'm looking at a DC-10 versus a helicopter, I want a DC-10 dropping stuff, or I want Rick's containers dropping stuff.
You have to fight fire based on fire behavior, and there's the terrain, all the other factors involved would make that decision one over the other. They both have their place, and it's not. Unless I was there, I couldn't make the decision.
Give me 3,000 or 4,000 gallons a shot. I'd rather take something like that. That's just, again, a layperson.
The other thing you brought up was the older aircraft.
Yeah.
You got to realize, and the Forest Service took a big step forward with this after we were, losing all those airplanes, was just the airworthiness program is extremely extensive, and I'm sure he can contest to that. Just the cost and the amount of stuff. The Forest Service is real aggressive in building a program that I believe makes that aircraft just as safe as a brand new one.
We tried to bring an airline standard to the industry because that's our heritage, 121 scheduled airline standard of both safety and maintenance and in operations and in training. We use full flight simulation to assist in our training effort as well. But to Dennis's point, there is a need for the right thing at the right time, but I think the focus should be on the product, and the product that the firefighter on the ground wants is some form of suppressant, whether it's water, retardant, gel, or foam, on the ground at the right time at the right spot. To focus on tail numbers and airplanes leads the agencies in the wrong direction, trying to take a minimum amount of dollars and getting a maximum amount of effect.
Yeah, and could I just add to that? You need a balanced program, and in the end of the day, the way you extinguish fires is you get boots on the ground, and these firefighters get in there and they finally extinguish the fire. So you need firefighters on the ground, They need equipment and engines on the ground. You need a fleet of helicopters. You need air tankers. You need the suite of tools available to truly extinguish fire. It's not just air tankers alone.
In California, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a fee assessed to people in the some of the red zones. Is that right, Rick?
Yeah, where I live in the Central Valley, if you're in certain areas, you pay an additional fee for CAL FIRE or whoever,
Like
additional tax.
Yeah, I just
$150.
wrote my check out.
$200, yeah, depending on where how much land you have, and it's really a point of contention is that additional fee because, again, when you look at what we're trying to do is deliver enough material, enough boots, enough shovels to get the job done, and then charging the taxpayers a little bit extra to get the job done, it really strikes a chord with them that maybe this is not being looked at in a total solution manner. And that's one of the things here. It's using the available resources smartly. Taking the current problem that we have and using the same solutions is not likely going to take us to the next opportunity. And that's one of the things that we're looking at is what other opportunities are there? Being mindful of the cost, being mindful of the safety concerns, what other resources can be brought to bear quickly and efficiently to take care of these fires?
Jim, from a public policy perspective, when you look at the wildland, urban interface where you have people building homes, living in homes that are in these red zones, in these areas that are very susceptible to destruction by wildfire. Right now, the numbers are approximately, we've built in about 16% of those areas. A building is occurring, development's occurring aggressively, and many more. We have 84% left. I mean, a tremendous amount of area to be added to the area that needs to be covered. Isn't it reasonable to ask people going into an area they know, certainly as new homes, is dangerous to pony up a little more?
Well, I mean, I think that's a tough question, particularly it is a very political question. It is a tax, no matter how you couch it, it works out as a tax. I think what we are trying to focus on in Colorado is education. So we want people to understand what they can do to mitigate their risks. Defensible space. Anybody who's heard Governor Hickenlooper talk about fires has heard him talk about defensible space and how we need to educate and encourage people who live in those areas to take those actions on their own. And we can encourage that through grants. We can encourage it through tax breaks. I mean, and those are the types of things that the legislature has to decide. But our focus, within our department is to concentrate on the education piece for the folks who live in that area.
Right, and Harris's point, and Dennis, I want you to jump in quickly with just a minute left in the show about taking a look at prevention measures, similar to what Jim's saying. What would be fair to ask people to do so that, and in terms of forest preservation and healthy forests as well, the government to do so that we minimize the risk in the first place?
Well, a lot of urban interface has community efforts to do that, and it's basically designing, looking at the fire behavior, the potential, and dealing with the fuels to where you could make defendable space there. There's been some real successes in some areas, and obviously they got a long ways to go.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. This was just part one of our two-part series on wildfires. Make sure you stay tuned for part two. This is Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.